into the meat and potatoes. Okay, so our first thoughts for discussion, right? And thinking about mindfulness as an overarching topic, some basic definitions, right? Could be a quality of state or of being, right? We're being mindful. I tell my children all the time, well, we'll be mindful of what you're doing, right? And then focusing an awareness on the present moment. Julie, I wanted to ask if you could talk about how would seven mindsets really define and get into mindfulness?
Well, as we talk about mindfulness, I just think about being present in the moment. Like, how hard is it sometimes for us? We're always thinking about something we did yesterday, or the day before, or thinking 2 weeks ahead and planning. How important it is just to be in that moment. And part of the seven mindsets are one of the mindsets is the time is now. And I think about embracing every moment and what it means to get in the zone. You can see there it talks about recognizing the emotions and adjusting your state of mind to optimize your actions and decisions in that moment. And then acting with purpose, being sure to prioritize meaningful and intentional actions that align with your goals and with your dreams. And so as you continue to practice this, it gets a little bit easier for those of us that are always thinking 2 weeks ahead or what happened yesterday. Really practicing mindfulness regularly and how that aligns to your own sense of like self-awareness and management and social awareness. And it really helps us with regulating our emotions, which we need to be able to do as educators so that we can be there for our students to help them. So that's how we see it.
And I love that you were talking about like so that it's optimal, right? We're talking
Yes.
about being in the moment. We're trying to optimize what we're doing in that moment. So it's for something positive, right? And I know Adriana and I talk about this. We're in similar mindsets with some difficulties we have with being anxious and, about like thinking about always what's coming next. And as educators or facilitators, it's really easy to get in that loop just
Mhm.
because the amount of expectation that's on your plate on any given day is always, okay, I have 3 minutes, I have to prep that. I have 45 minutes, I have to print this and then call this person and make sure I enter that. Heather, what types of cycles, like mental cycles, from your experience teaching, honestly, any age group, would you feel yourself getting into? Would you feel that anxiety about like what's coming next in your day?
Absolutely. 24 years. And let me back up just a second too, because, Julie and I met in Atlanta, Georgia in 2013. She's was the queen of geometry and quadratic equations for the high school students. And so knowing her all these years as a colleague and a friend, it's just a blessing to have you here. I wanted to start with that. I mean, clearly anxious moments, but it just depends. I'm always organized, right? And that's something I have to be constantly ready to go. However, things happen, throughout the 45-minute class period, right? What can go
Mhm.
wrong? Oh,
Everything.
we know what can go wrong. We know very well
Yeah.
what can go wrong and how are we going to react to that. So I think it's more about, having that plan, having that thought process and just going with the flow, taking the punches as they come, right? Rolling with it, being flexible and just staying in your lane as best you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that doesn't feel like it comes naturally. So I know Julie, in just a few minutes, you're going to equip us with like a type of activity that we can do because really mindfulness, it's like muscle memory. It has to be exercised, right? Sometimes that's not naturally how we default
Right.
being mindful. So I was curious. What types of mindfulness activities, and I know like in 2025, mindfulness, reflection, they've kind of become buzzwords, right? Especially having so much time indoors, like during COVID and whatnot. But I'm curious to know, what types of mindfulness activities have y'all experienced either in life or school, workplace? Like Adriana, I think about you with like all of the planning and working with clients and having to go back and forth and like the design process. So is there any type of like mindfulness activity that you would do to like keep yourself right in that process?
I mean, I think it's really hard to stop the mindset once you start to spiral into that anxious brain and you start to spiral into the stress and anxiety of submittals and contract documents and all of those things. I think that's where it's kind of hard to pull back from. So I try to start my day, and we've spoken on this before. I try to start my day mindful and intentional. So go to the gym in the morning, even if that means that I start work later and then work just later into the evening. I get my workout in the morning, and that just kind of frees my brain for some, some of that energy that doesn't need to be there kind of goes into that. And I think it's about how you start your day. And I'm not a morning person before anybody says, well, must be nice. I'm not a morning person, but if I start my day mindful, then I am able to handle the stress and the anxiety of the day better. And of course, the space that I'm in is going to affect how I function throughout the day.
Yeah. And I know that we've talked about Heather, I still love the type of music that you highlighted that you listen to when like you want to have like that gym session or whatever, but it almost makes me think of our internal talk then, right? Like mindfulness activity that I used to do with my kindergartners was like they were going to give themselves an internal pep talk. And it's almost like, they're looking like self-affirmations. And so we're going to do that internally, right? And mindfulness activities look different depending on what age group you're in and like developmentally where you are. And I know, Julie, like a best practice for seven mindsets, right, is a part of that self-talk. Do you want to like tell us a little bit about what that means or what that might look like from a seven mindsets perspective?
Oh, absolutely. The research that was done on for Seven Mindsets was all about how it had nothing to do with where someone came from or background, education, all the things. It was all about the way they thought about things. Their
Mm.
perspectives was what matters. So that's where the mindsets originated from, is that research study, and that we can change the way that we think about things. And how powerful is that? That we can learn to take experiences that could be seen as challenges and then elevate our perspective to be able to look at them in a different way to say, okay, what have I learned from this experience?
I
How
love
can I
it.
grow? What can I do differently next time? And I feel like, with my own children at home, as well as the ones that I taught, they just need to see that sometimes, that change or shift in perspective, what a difference it can make.
Yeah, well, and speaking about different age groups, like, right, like we can sit here and we can verbalize that process with
Right.
each other, right, and reflect on that process. And then when you think about the different developmental milestones with linguistics or with emotion or with, self-perception and all of those lovely internal processes, it's hard to do that. It's really hard. And then you also get into like the neurodiversity of it all. So for someone that is on the spectrum and has a hard time verbalizing anyways, what does internal talk look like when you're already having, when outwardly an expression is a struggle? Or what happens when I know for a lot of kids that I've worked with that have a combination of ADHD and autism, they're Pop Tarts when it comes to the things that they want to say. And so being able to take a breath and being able to have that inner moment before we do can be really difficult or really tricky. So getting into the tool chest, right, or the
Mm-hmm.
toolbox of
Yes.
what does this look like? How can we do this? And not only as adults, but like, how can you walk through this process with kids, with learners, with your own children, multiple age groups? So, Julie, I'm so excited. Let's dive into this exercise. I'm pumped.
Absolutely. Well, this exercise is something we do with both adults, and we've done with students and children as well. So when you think about an iceberg, we see, what's above the water. And so we kind of do this activity to think about, what do people see when they look at me? So what is seen to the outside world? What traits do they believe that I have? What do they assume about me? So I might put things above the iceberg for myself, like approachable or friendly, or this is what they see. And then below the surface, what's not seen. And this is like what parts of your identity can't be seen by just looking at me. Who am I underneath the surface? And so, you'll see those other things that are really affecting what the outside is, but a lot of times we're keeping some of those parts hidden. The fact that we struggle with certain things, or that this is difficult. They can't always see all the other things that are going on um, underneath the surface. So we
Yeah.
use this identity iceberg for exactly that, being able to put the things above what's seen, what do people see when they look at me, and then below what parts of my identity cannot be seen. And we had this done with a teacher in Florida that actually did this for her students and had a class of only about 25 or so students. And they put them all over the walls. And other students came up to the teacher and said, "Hey, can I do that as well?" Because they realized there were connections that they had, that there were a lot of things that kids felt underneath the surface that others could identify with. And like, I feel that as well, like depression or anxiety or, suicidal thoughts, not good enough, things like that, the insecurities. But what do people see? Well, this is interesting to look at, the straight A's and the mama bear carefree. This is a ninth grade girl, and this is what she wrote. And so it just connects with people so much when they realize what's seen and then what's often not seen. Great for self-awareness and just understanding. Mm-hmm.
And I think like
It's so
making
interesting. Oh,
right
sorry.
and make no, that's okay. And like making those connections, it just makes you feel like you're not alone.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that that's another one of our mindsets is we are connected, the importance of our relationships and recognition that we're all going through something. And so when you realize that, the compassion and the love that you have for others, because you realize you're not alone in this, everybody's got something that they're going through. So such an important piece. But yeah, I was just going to say, as you think about doing this for your own life, you could even just draw a line on a sheet of paper and write the things above that, people think about, and then below that are not seen and that you often might, struggle with, and those sorts of things. We also like to show this because, as educators, we measure the ABCs, the attendance, the behavior, content mastery. We put numbers to these things. We can tell how many days you've been absent or, how many referrals you've had or those sorts of things. And content mastery usually assign grades, oftentimes numerical. But all these things underneath, like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and all those things you see there are impacting your attendance, behavior, and content mastery in school. And they impact us too. As educators with students, you got to think about how your own sense of self-management is impacting, because that affects your responses to the kids, So it
It
all
seems
is in
like
there.
it
Mhm.
seems like it would be a great exercise for adults for
Oh, absolutely.
to
Yeah.
do in the workplace or in, social surroundings with your friends, and just to kind of see how, we're all the same. We all have the same fears, and we all, on the surface, we're always thinking, oh, I wish I was as positive and happy as Hannah.
Yeah.
And, if we were to do an exercise like this, we'd connect on a different level because we could see that the bottom side of the iceberg is a lot deeper, and we can be the same and
Mhm.
connect
And
that way.
yeah, I was going to say, when you see like words like resilience underneath, you think about things that people have been through. That was
Yeah.
not easy to get through. I mean, you talk
Yeah.
to anybody and there have been challenges and traumas and things that have impacted their life and have been difficult to get through. But when you can see the other side of like, what has this built in me? How am I stronger because of this experience? That's really where we can connect as well.
Right.
I really saw this come to fruition when I was at Mesa High 2 Fridays ago, literally from Miss Barron and her teaching as a profession class, right? Taking a look at the iceberg situational things that occurred with her 25 kids 6 times a day, right?
Mhm.
Lunchtime, the drama with the boyfriend, the girlfriend, this happened at home, this one's getting evicted, this, all of these situational things that are going on consistently in every minute of that class day, right? And all of these things really are powerful, powerful components to really have a handle on, and for kids to be able to understand how they can build those pieces into their own personal growth and their own mindsets.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I would say, for those of us that aren't around, the world of education or the realm of education, or might not know the intricacies of education, right? The misconception that a teacher's just a teacher. They're not also like a coach and a guide and a friend and a therapist and a this and a
Mhm.
that and a
And a
nurse and a
person.
that and a
Yeah.
they're the hats just keep growing, right? The number of
And
hats that you wear. And, honestly, it doesn't matter if it's an at-risk school, a well-performing school, a charter school, an independent school, a school for the deaf. It doesn't matter what kind. When you have an ecosystem of humans and they're all together, they have shared experiences. And so when you do an activity like this, especially, I think of a whole slew of different age groups. Like Heather, you're
Mhm.
talking about like relationship issues and home issues. And then I think about like there's little ones that come to school, they're just they're hungry, right? Or like
Mhm.
little things, right? So even doing this with littles, if they can't write, they can draw. They can
Mhm.
draw how they feel underneath the iceberg, right? Or if you have someone that's nonverbal, this is a beautiful activity for them, because they still get to share those deep internal intricacies, right? But it's about strengthening that ecosystem. So everything about this I love. And there's one type of activity that we know allows us to be very mindful, and that's like getting outside together,
Mhm.
like being outside together. And we know all of the research points to this is one type of reflective activity, mindfulness activity that benefits children of all ages while they're in school. And so when I think about the iceberg, when I think about
Mhm.
internal talk, I'm layering all of these best practices basically. So Julie, could you take a minute just to highlight a couple, best practices that the seven mindsets would suggest in terms of mindfulness?
Absolutely. Just take a snapshot of these seven mindsets and all the different colors of everything is possible. Passion first, we are connected, 100% accountable, attitude of gratitude, live to give, and the time is now. Because we often say it's, you know, common sense stuff, but not always common practice. So when you think about some of these things, having high expectations for your life, believing that everything is possible, that you can achieve those things, we often get in our own way. For those things. We
Mhm.
have to be accountable as well. The 100% accountable mindset is such an empowering mindset when you realize you own all of it and you're continuing to grow through this life, the importance there. I love we are connected and passion first, those two mindsets, the importance
Mhm.
of relationship in our lives and following the things that we're good at and that we enjoy. What are your strengths? And going down the route to find out what job suits you best for what you're passionate about. And then, of course, the importance of gratitude. I mean, I start my day with a gratitude journal, just reflecting and writing. That's part of my mindfulness practice that I think is really important to setting the tone for the day. The importance of service and live to give, of course. And like we were talking about before, mindfulness, the time is now, being present, being where your feet are, and the importance of that. So that's what all of these mindsets kind of speak to is just being very aware of what you're thinking about and how that impacts your responses to this life, how you take in all the things that are going on.
It's so interesting looking at this, and I'm thinking I'm putting like a pedagogical lens on, right? Thinking about methodology, if we're tying it to education, right? And I'm looking at all of these best practices, and I'm like, and then I think about teaching methods like one teach, one assist, or, more authoritative facing environments where it's one person standing and talking and everyone else is sitting and listening. And in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't necessarily connect, right? There seems to be a roadblock, right? To
Mhm.
we are connected, passion first, attitude of gratitude. How can we have all of these best practices incorporated into our day when maybe our instructional methodology doesn't necessarily give space for practices like this, right? Heather, I know that you've spent, a handful of years with high schoolers, and I'm thinking like sometimes it's really hard for that age group to feel connected. Like it's really hard. So could you speak to kind of like your experience and the time that you've been around that age group and maybe what would have helped or what you have seen?
Clearly. And please let me apologize ahead of time. I just got to Long Beach and I am at a real coffee shop. And so there's dogs and other things happening around me. So we'll refocus. But, clearly, primarily with my English language learners, they're coming to us, whether they're 5 or 19, literally, with no assistance, right? No ability to connect, no language, the language barrier in and of itself, right? The stories, all of the neuroscience behind what happens to the frontal lobe for some of these children and their trauma getting to the United States, right? I think about what I could have done with the seven mindsets with Julie at South Forsyth High School 13 years ago. What we could do for any child. And that's why I love this program because it's K-12, because it embeds all of these philosophies and it for each of those levels, each of those ages, there's applicable things that they can do and wrap their heads around. Clearly, for me, I love attitude of gratitude, and I love the 100% accountable. I think that and I love that for adults in our
Mm-hmm.
workplace, in our work life, in our world. That piece is so important to me, and I feel that generationally you see this change in children, right, and how they're being raised. What are they being accountable for? Are they not being accountable for? And what's happening as a result of that? What are these people that we're creating to go out into this big beautiful world?
Right.
And having these pieces, Julie and I did a lot with social emotional learning as well, and how closely this is all interrelated. And so, it's just a fantastic opportunity to just have kids be able to think about their thoughts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like,
And to Adriana, to your point in highlighting, like these practices are incredible for adults as well, right?
mhm,
And I think about, so the whole furniture, I'm just going to use furniture procurement as an example. Woo, the whole like how schools actually get the furniture and pieces that go in their buildings and all of the hands that are involved and all of the
mhm,
entities that are involved and all the red tape that is involved. For those of you
mhm,
listening, you know what I mean. Um,
mhm,
I imagine having all of those entities really hone in on these best practices. Like imagine like in perfect world, right? In a perfect
Yeah.
world, when we're taking the actual time to really integrate what this looks like, in my mind, then I think, well, would that process be so difficult? Or, would connecting one entity to the other and having collaborative conversations and connected conversations and service-minded conversation, would it end up being as difficult as sometimes what it is? I know that's like a what if situation, but I'm going to throw that out there into the universe and someone's going to catch it. All right, we're gonna jump into our first pour over question. Da, 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 da. Okay, so we talked about mindfulness in terms of an activity that we can do being outdoors, right? And being connected to oneself and being grounded by being outside. So here's a question. Woo! In the United States, how much time are kids getting outside at school? So I'm going to release the poll. Here we go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ta-da! Okay, your options 1 to 5 minutes per day, 5 to 10 to 15, 20 plus minutes per day. How long do you think kids are getting outside? Mm, oh, so 15 to 20 minutes and 20 plus minutes per day. Those are the options that are being selected. Y'all are generous. Ooh, okay. Okay. Okay, so here we
15
go.
to 20 is generous. I'm scared. I'm scared for the kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sharing
Mm-hmm.
15 to 20 minutes per day.
That's hot.
25% of you said 20 plus minutes per day.
You're not.
Let me just share. I'm going to share a little quick fact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's like 3 minutes in between classes. So instructors barely have time to use the bathroom, let alone do the kids actually get outside? And sometimes, right, sometimes that is because of weather or there may be a complication or things like that. But sometimes it's even because of real estate where they're located. Maybe they don't have a space to go outside. Maybe they're an overpopulated building. So maybe they have to play Tetris with how many kids can be outside and in what space, right? So I'm going to share my screen one more time. Here we go. So recent statistics, y'all. So we have from 2018. So that's already a handful of years ago. From 2018, it's like 4 to 7 minutes per day. And if you look at stats from 2025, it's maybe like 12 minutes a week. So when you're really thinking about a very large type of self-reflection capability, or what allows us to be a little bit more mindful or in the moment, something like getting fresh air, they're not getting it. And we're seeing that within the space. And so Heather, would you share? I know we compiled some examples of more intentional, there's your word, intentional practices. So Heather, walk us through a couple of like other types of intentional practices, especially from an educator's perspective.
This together, and I found it fascinating because it really also was in collaboration with a lot of things that adults do, like cognitive behavioral therapy, social behavioral therapy. These little examples, literally, yes, for kids, but clearly can be for adults also. The AEIOU, right? What can you say that comes to your mind that describes how you're learning? How are you feeling in that reflection, right? What aha moments did you have for the AEIOU? What questions do you still have? The
Yeah.
intentional inquiry I really love, because this really pulls in thought and emotion. And this can be addressed. We can flip this for adults, right? Coming into work today, I feel for this day today, my intention is this, our goals, what, of course, way larger than that. What would I like to focus on today? Here's what I'm going to focus on today. So intentional questioning, not just for children, adults as well.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. Many of us, in fact, I think all of us already know the senses, right? 5 things you feel, 4 things you hear, 3 things you see, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you can taste. And that's also a meditative practice, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, with intentional breathing. I love this reflection. And I actually, I have this taken at Woods Canyon Lake because I love that reflection onto the lake there, and what that does for us. What are we doing with our reflective practices? Knowing that they must have a purpose.
Yeah.
They must have a meaning, and that it's just all interrelated.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of one of our espresso shots. So, uh, I also love, it's a methodology called responsive classroom. And actually what's really interesting is the types of pedagogical practices in responsive classroom, Julie, it aligns and it parallels with 7 mindsets. And I would love like just a clash of those two items because it's not only pedagogical, it is extremely internal and reflective. So having those two things coincide. But what I love, especially Heather, in talking about intentional inquiry, so restorative classroom, one content area that we do during the day is called a morning meeting. Right. And Adriana, just like how you said, I like to start my day by going to the gym to get my mind right. So a lot of times schools will implement a morning meeting for specific age groups. So right away when they start the day, before they get into any rigorous academic work, before they get into anything, there's a collaborative space, right, in the room. Usually they're sitting in circles or whatever, depending on the age group, and they have a morning meeting to set up the intention for the day. And I love this practice. We'll talk a little bit in the design section. What can this look like, right? How can we pull in the iceberg activity? How can we pull in intentional inquiry? And how can we mirror that with the physical space and make room for it? So highlighting all of these mindful practices, it directly relates to how we're designing and setting up the space. It's such they're so connected it's not even funny. And to like act like they're not connected, it is not setting up anybody for success. Um to recap kind of like the importance of integrating mindfulness activities. So we love Harvard Business Review. And a lot of times there are case studies and empirical evidence in regards to organizational leadership and what happens when you are like a CEO and a thought leader and what we should do. Well, there's a slew of case studies that are connected specifically to mindfulness, right? Specifically to doing mindfulness exercises and being in the moment and intentional. And so, in this article, if you aspire to be a great leader, be present, right? And Julie, it goes right back to the like, be in the moment, like
Yeah.
be present, right? So this just highlights it's amazing for adults. And this CEU, after he started incorporate CEU, this is the industry we work in. This CEO,
Yes.
after incorporating just like a 10-minute mindfulness practice on a daily basis, um, coworkers said they're more engaging, they're nicer to work with, they're more inspiring. And I think that pulls in Julie, right? You're a little bit more empathetic when you
Hmm.
do these types of activities. Um,
And
could
just
you
to
speak? Yeah, go ahead, go ahead. Oh, wait, Julie, there
Sorry
you
about
are.
that. I was just going to say, it's so important for our secondary classrooms too, because when you spoke about the morning meetings and the circles, it's easier almost sometimes, I want to say, in elementary. And then when we hit middle and high school, we lose some of that. And I really feel like they need it so much. Our little teenagers that are figuring out their life need that time, that intentional time to be mindful. Like, where are you at? Like, how are we doing? And if we can incorporate more into our 6 through 12, that would be incredible. And that's what like Seven Mindsets is designed to do. But it would be wonderful to have 5 to 10 minutes every day to practice some of these things.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And like that's like a perfect segue to getting into language, right?
Hmm.
And I know Heather, we talked about language from like a language learner perspective, and Julie, we're talking about language from like an emotional developmental perspective. But you're right, it's really easy to have morning meetings with littles because like, oh, that's fun, or we're learning how to talk about our emotions. But it's kind of like linguistically, once we're a little bit more developed, why does that disappear?
Right. We need
Why,
that
like,
time.
where?
And
Hormones, high emotions, feelings
it's
like
so true. Adriana's right. I mean, that's the time where we really need to be flushing some of those things out and be more comfortable with that, being able
Yeah.
to have those
when you're
conversations.
getting to know yourself like as a sort
Yeah.
of adult. So I feel like it's almost in middle school when this should be implemented the most, and I
Mhm.
think learners should be taught this exact skill, which is working through language and mindfulness and thought process and emotions, and because that's when it's the craziest.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
And the misconception is, right, because we're short on time during the day, the misconception is, well, we do a mindful break when we're too antsy. We
Mhm.
include mindfulness when we're a little rowdy, or
Mhm.
we use a brain break as almost like this an excuse because you feel the temperature shift in the
Mhm.
space. So it's not being utilized in a proactive manner. It's or a preventative manner at all. It's almost we're reacting to now this
Mhm.
roller coaster of a
Yeah.
vibe that we notice in the space when really we could have intentionally set the tone by inserting some of these practices,
It almost
right?
sounds like a punishment if you set it up after it's gotten
Mhm.
busy and anxious and stressful, and then you're like, oh, okay, everybody, we're going to take a breather and do this thing. It's almost like, what is this punishment? And then maybe it we just won't engage in the same way.
Mhm.
So, and I know that there's time periods that are set up, especially like for my son, I know there was time periods that were set up, and they're utilized for catching up on work that you've fallen behind on and catching up. So it's space is carved out for more work as opposed to
Mhm.
maybe just a 10-minute mindful exercise.
Yeah, 100%. And then when we talk about language patterns, mindfulness and intentionality, ooh, we
Mhm.
love our labels in
Mhm.
education.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yes, and
And
aren't they just so horribly, horribly outdated and so horribly overused and
well,
in an inappropriate fashions when we're dealing with children?
well, say more, Heather. Do you have like an example that you could give of like a language pattern like that you know?
I think that we're headed there right now within our talk.
Yeah, we
I
are.
think that when you talk about expectations that are being communicated, you know, they're nonverbal, they're verbal, it's tone,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
direction
Hmm.
as well. It
hmm
is in intonation. It
Yeah.
is a culmination of different things, and then impacting that other human, whether
Right.
they're
Yeah.
5, 13, or 47 and a half.
And so much of that
Mhm.
communication is nonverbal, to your point. Like there's a lot that what all's going on inside of you, the kids are picking up on, and anyone that's around you is picking up on that energy and that vibe you're bringing to the situation. So you have to think, how can I get myself better into a place of love and compassion for others when I'm not feeling that certain way? Because people are picking up on all of that, especially, with teachers and in and out with 150, 170 kids a day at the high school level. It's just you're constantly inundated. And how do you reset yourself? And I think that proactive touch is critical. Hmm.
I saw this post on LinkedIn and it said, it said, kids react really well when they feel like they're liked.
Yeah.
And I was
Hmm.
like, well, kids actually know how you really feel about them no matter what you say. Like,
Right.
so they
Right.
pick up on that. And so
Very intuitive.
Hmm.
they are exceedingly intuitive. And Julie, I love that you highlighted body language as a pattern because things like rolling your eyes,
Hmm.
things like looking away, things like the shoulder slump, things like even something subtle as if a learner comes up to you and they're going to ask you a question, but your feet are pointing the other way, like
Hmm.
those that's not being intentional with your language because language isn't encompasses your whole being, right? And we say all the time in terms of spatial design, people in a space pick up on 80% of what's going on around them and
Hmm.
20% of what's actually coming out of your mouth.
Right.
So everything that we just highlighted, like, ooh, and so we'll get into like some patterns, but I wanted to highlight from our espresso shot. Okay, so this book is called Ungifted.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of like a teeny bopper book. However, it's 200 pages of complete amazingness. And if you have the downtime, you need to read it because the read between the lines messaging for educators in this book is absolutely phenomenal. So, this book goes through this main character, Donovan, and he has those labels. Oh, he has lack of impulse control. He's a troublemaker. He's unthoughtful. And he destroys accidentally school property. And as he's in trouble, the superintendent accidentally writes his name down on a gifted and talented list instead of like a I need to call their family list. So he accidentally gets sent to this Academy of Scholastic Distinction, which is for gifted, right? But he has been labeled ungifted, and it's a hysterical read. It honestly great for all ages, but it really does highlight the types of environments that we engage learners in, the types of language, whether it's verbal or nonverbal language. It is all encompassing with how they internalize those messages. And so the way that we speak about them, the way that we show our body, not only about them, but about the space that we're in, it says so much. So I highly recommend it. It not only is it hysterical, but it's like it's really well done. And then speaking on like verbal patterns, there's so many times I'm going to focus on the one that says timeout or break. uh, because it goes into a design element that we're going to be talking about. But there's been arguments since the dawn of time about what does the phrase taking a time out, what does that mean, right? Am I being sent on time out? Am I taking a time out of an overstimulating scenario? Is it positive facing? Is it negative facing? I know, Julie, you look like you're processing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on like this verbiage.
Well, I think our words matter, don't they? And interpretations of what that exactly means. And many times I think we give our kids a timeout because we really need the timeout. And so we need to check ourselves there and say, who needs this? What are we asking for? So just be aware of that as you're using some of those terms. It is very important to be thinking of behavior affirming language as you're thinking about language use with students, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And why we've kind of moved from like internal, right, mindfulness
Mhm,
to external mindfulness is because it has to start here. It
mhm,
can't start outwardly. It has to start where we like that going back to that iceberg, right? It has to
mhm,
start here first in order for us to then be of service to others. So we're going into our second pour over question. True or false?
mhm.
Language can change a learner's perception of space. So now we're going to start incorporating physical space. So true or false, language can change a learner's perception of space. I'm going to go ahead and release it. Okay, here we go. So true or false. No, this is not a trick question. There's an actual answer. Okay. Oh, there's one answer and it's coming in all at once, coming in hot. Okay. Yes, so 100%. Oh. Okay, they
Maybe.
changed their mind. 100%, 100% of participants said yes, language can alter a learner's perception of space. It absolutely can. So we're going to get into some nitty-gritty. These are visuals of a
Mhm,
very popular buzz space in an educational setting. This has many different names.
mhm.
We have a calming corner, a cozy corner, the you see there, the Zen zone. Have you guys, have you ladies
Yeah.
heard this be called anything else?
The Zen Den. I've heard of Zen dens.
Zen
Hmm.
den.
I
Yeah,
like that.
the Zen den. But usually, right, like 9 times out of 10, it is a corner, right? It is
Hmm.
like a small section of a space. Depending on the age group, there's either a color association chart, an emotional chart, verbal cues, fidgets, textural integration, right? Maybe some noise canceling headphone. And this is K-12 higher ed, right? I've seen calming, cozy corners in student service departments on college campuses, right? So this is a thing that exists, right, in the realm of education.
Hmm.
However, and I want to hear like how you guys have experienced this. My over a decade experience in charter school is usually it's purchased like the items are purchased off Amazon and it's purchased by the educator and it's kind of thrown
Hmm.
hodgepodge together in the corner and it's done with amazing intention, original intention, but what it becomes is, well, you need to go to the calming corner or it becomes a reward. It becomes one or the other. So tell me some of y'all's experiences with the Zen Den. Julie, you want to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. I do agree with you there. It becomes something that becomes either a reward or a punishment, and then it's kind of holds that reign versus something that can be a little more organic. And I just think about what if you were able to create that whole space and not just a corner in your classroom, in your whatever environment, work environment, anything, if you were able to create that space, what brings you peace, what gives you affirmation, not just in one section, but throughout. Throughout. Yeah.
Throughout the
Well,
whole space.
I know it makes a difference. And I was telling Heather the other day because she saw my classrooms back in the day and just the things on the walls and how much they matter to 17-year-old kids. I mean, it doesn't matter the age. It matters what you have up on the walls, how you celebrate them. All those things are so important.
I'll say
Um,
I'm not an educator, but I did go to school
yeah.
a lot. And this is not something that I experienced in any grade level in school. I had very authoritative and institutional instruction K through 12.
Mhm.
Did I know at the time that it would have made a difference? Absolutely not. Looking back, would it have made a difference for a child that had
Hmm.
ADHD and was on the spectrum? It would have made a huge difference in the way that I went about my day and the high stress of pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, and then I couldn't. So it would have made a huge difference. Having even if I know we're saying like there's a positive or a negative connotation to the space depending on how it's utilized in, in the ecosystem. But I think having it in general, I would have made a huge difference.
Mhm.
Would have made a huge difference. And Julie, you kind of highlighted, you hinted at something that we love to call whole space design.
Mhm.
So exactly what you're talking about and putting those puzzle pieces together. Heather, what are you thinking?
Mhm.
I was just thinking, just about the irony of all of this coming together, right? And for example, going to Mesa High School and talking to them about their classroom space, their CTE class, teaching as a profession, right? The
Mhm.
kids want to be teachers, they want to be future educators. What they didn't know, what Adriana's taught me about color and texture and design in a month and a half, right? Having the students really evaluate their space and
Mhm.
what's
Mhm.
important to them about their space. Reflecting back on the question, does language affect how they perceive the space? Absolutely, because they know if that seat over there has a box on it or a box around it, right, that says, shh, zip it,
Mhm.
right? I'm being facetious, of course, but
Yeah.
it's really, really important. And I think that us, as we're segueing now into the design piece of what we're discussing today, it's just all so marvelous that it just is raveling together so nicely because the kids really, when they finally understood those tiny little components, but just how grand they are, color, sound,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Lighting.
Acoustics,
Yeah.
texture. It was fascinating to them, and I think it's really um, is something that changed their mind and changed their
Yeah.
mindset about how they feel about their space. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're completely right. I was just going to say to share that when you go into different teachers' classrooms, like as an administrator, you can feel how the design that teacher has set up their classroom and everything else, what it's geared for, and why the kids feel comfortable in certain classrooms and not in others as much to share out, to talk, to have conversations. It really does make a huge difference for those kids and for the energy of the room. You walk in and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel comfortable here. I like being here, just like a coffee shop or something like that, how it works for you or not. So,
And Adriana she's gonna give us some of the meat and potatoes of like from a design perspective, what that looks like. It almost feels as though when you only talk about work surfaces and seating, it's literally just an appetizer to like what the whole plate, right? Your whole meal should actually be. If someone came to you and it was dinner time and they were like, okay, here's like a salad, and then they never came back to you with anything else, you would be highly confused. And so when we think about mindfulness and intentionality in the space, like Adriana, hit us with the actual meal. Like, what are the golden nuggets of takeaway and incorporating this into design?
Well, I mean, we've hit on it a few times in some of these slides already on how it's not just language, it's not just like a practice in the morning or in the afternoon. It has so much to do with your space and the environment you're in. So, you think about the space that you're in literally right now where you're sitting and how that fosters mindfulness, or the space that you came from, before you got to where you are today, like right now, or the space you're going to go to after, and is that going to foster the mindfulness that you need to finalize your day in a better way. So it's about the entire space in general. So going into what that space encompasses, it's the colors on the walls, the textures, the lighting has a huge effect on you mentally. Um, and clutter or declutter.
Yeah.
So, we live in a time of consumerism and maximalism, and it makes a huge difference if you're the type of person that can, be mindful and be at peace in a space that is maximalized, that's great. But if you're a person that struggles with trying to be mindful and intentional and struggles with anxiety and needs a bit more calm, then decluttering is such an important part of your space.
Yeah, 100%. And we talk about We talk about everything in terms of what you said, like texture, temperature, lighting. I recently watched this video where someone slowed down. They were in a space with I think it was like hospital lighting, and they slowed down
Fluorescence.
the video, all the fluorescent lighting. They slowed down the video, and you could hear in slow motion the buzz in and out, and the flicker really slowly. And it was like if you're in that space for 8 hours a day and that's a constant, like what is that doing, right, to that, all those internal, like reflective processes. I absolutely love this slide and information when we talk about cultivating mental qualities, like a deeper sense of connectedness. So there's something simple just as playing spatial Tetris in a room with all of your learners, with all of your kids, allows you to be more connected as an ecosystem. And it allows them to understand the needs of those around them, just like the needs of my 3-year-old, if you can hear her in the background.
We can hear her.
Um, but being able to work together as a group to rearrange the space or having such preferential seating where they're learning from an early age to a teenager age, okay, this person needs something different than what I need, and that's okay. That's cool, right? That's awesome. That's like building their empathetic muscle, right? To be able to register that. And I think that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and some of my research that I did for that article that we just had up, it talks about attention to the quality of your inner space and how that connects to your outer space,
Yeah.
and just the space within and the space around. So it helps us recollect to awaken the space in our minds, which receives and contains everything. Um,
Ooh.
and it also, once you connect all those things, the space you're in with the mind, with the space inside of your head, that's feelings, perceptions, moods, thoughts. It's everything.
Well, and it allows you to think clearly about it, right?
Hmm.
This is probably in terms of intentional language, the examples that we have here are probably some of my favorite. I think like for those of us listening or on the call, these are takeaways. Like this is takeaway language cues that you can take with you, whether you are working with a school, whether it's you yourself, like going into work, whatever it is that I think this verbiage is another tool that can be used. So Adriana, hit us with it.
If you've seen our other coffee talks, you've you've already heard us talk about sound and lighting and how that makes a huge difference. But there's something very different in the environment when you look at your institutional classroom that you grew up in, which was very authoritarian and no natural light. In a lot of the scenarios we've talked about in schools, there was no windows because they thought that that would take attention away from the instructor. So very cold surfaces, very bright lights, no green anywhere. And by green, I mean biophilia, right? And just how that doesn't foster any creativity or thought process or mindfulness, versus a space that has different types of seating and experiences for different types of learners, natural light coming in and really playing with biophilia and bringing the outside in. Maybe you aren't able to have windows or aren't, you're in a, urban area and you can't spend 15 to 20 very generous minutes outside. Bring that outdoor in. Find ways to make the indoor green. Mindfulness in those spaces, slowing down, disconnecting from tech. I know that tech is everything right now with learning. We're moving to technology instead of books, and a lot of the work now is not handwritten. It's on a computer screen or on a phone. But trying to take some time to be present, be in the moment, and slow down. I think that's going to foster mindfulness in the ecosystem, in the classroom, in your space.
What I noticed too about these visuals, right? Talking about like a this or a that. We in the world of design, we talk about, straight lines or curvature. And subconsciously, what communicates, in the realm of design. So what do you guys think is the quote unquote better line to use in design? Straight lines or curvature? Which one do you guys think?
Curvature. Yep.
Curvature, right? And I love that we all did that at the same time. Curvature. So it is been psychologically proven that the way that our brains follow in a linear way, straight lines versus curvature, when it's a straight line and the straight line ends, subconsciously our brains go, I don't know what to do next. Like I don't know where to go after that. I'm not really sure. It might make me feel a little anxious, right? Curvature, our brains naturally follow curvature. We're a little bit more relaxed in following curvature. So when you go into a space and you see all like the straight lines, harsh corners and whatnot, um, again, talking about like the body language of your physical space, right? That's communicating that messaging to everyone that walks into the space. And so a piece that we highly recommend when we're thinking of soft lines, when we're thinking of nature-based, is we have a bio table. And so the bio table is a way to bring all of this in together. So we're gonna watch it real quick together. So I love that so much because like how different would my world have been as an eighth grader if I still had some form of sensory something right in the space. Like I still want to dig in the dirt and play with worms and collect things and like just because you get a little older doesn't mean that goes away, right? And the reason why we have the shape of the table the way that we have it is because so many times we want to go under. We want to go under something to see. I want to be close to, right? I want to be able to observe all of that. And if we're doing some of the mindful activities, right, that we talked about, whether it's like the AEIOU or the senses of the space, it would be so nice to have like a beta fish where I can sit and do my senses, my mindfulness activity, but I'm also incorporating some of that nature aspect with. Um, so when we talk about intentional design, we do talk about whole space, right? And so this is like an example of what we've been talking about, colors, textures, earth tones. We've talked about before the misconception of only using like primary colors for primary age groups. And like, what does that do? So Adriana, I'm gonna move ahead to the second one, but I want you to fill us in on some aspects of the Serenicube and how it kind of is connected to this whole idea of mindfulness for different age groups. So could you talk with us a little bit about design considerations for the Serenicube?
So as you see it here on the screen, you're noticing that there are textures and colors that we've been implementing, light that can come through that we've been talking about. Um, the back panel of the Serenity Cube, as a standard, comes with the grassy. So not only does that touch on your sensory needs, because everybody has sensory needs. Everybody feels good when you're touching something with a little bit of texture or softness, but it also brings biophilia into a space that could be your go-to space for mindfulness, for calm, for taking a breather and being in the moment. The plexi circles bring in natural light. So, preferably set it up next to a window and have that natural light come in. But the colors are so important. When you think about a spa, you don't think about a space where you're going to go be calm and you have reds and, oranges and yellows, which are great colors for a space that needs to be high energy and high productivity. but the blues and the greens, the calming hues of those blues and greens have a big impact on how your brain functions in the space.
Yeah, exactly. And I like even the verbiage here of being conscious design. It's not an afterthought. It's not a copy paste. Like Julie, I think about some of those best practices of like Seven Mindsets best practices and how unserving would it be to do them the exact same way with different people groups because everybody is different. So you have to be very conscious about what you're doing. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I love that y'all bring attention to the conscious design because you have to consciously be aware of all the things that are impacting you, your emotions. That's part of our self-management, self-awareness. All of that comes into play. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, very
In
important.
design, so conscious design, you need to make selections that are going to bring mindfulness into your classroom, that are going to declutter, that are going to be a calming space for your learners to actually be able to achieve mental clarity and pay attention and do all the things that you want them to do, learn. But in conscious design, you can, choose mindful pieces that are conscious of, considering budget and functionality and durability. So you want something that's going to stand the test of time, and that's materials, and that is organic shapes, and it's going to be in the long run better for your budget. So you're being kind of green. So you're saving the planet a little bit by not changing out furniture every 5 years, and having durability. But you also don't want those pieces that you get to age in a way where you've got all these bright colors that are not bringing that mindfulness and calmness to your ecosystem. But also, you're going to look at them in 5 years and be, wow, this is so dated. Then that's, you're considering the time, the budget, and all of the stuff that goes back
Exactly.
into it. So having a conscious mindset when you're making your selections for the space. So yes, you want your learners to be mindful and have mindful spaces and to be low anxiety, low stress, but you also want your end user to not think about that budget every 5 years.
Yeah.